Hi, this is DoNotCiv. This video is going to be about peak oil and sustainability. Now, I'm sure most of you couldn't have helped but noticed, if you read the source of origin for a lot of the foods that you buy in the meat aisles and the produce aisles, that a lot of this food is grown and transported from thousands of miles away. For example, the other night I wanted to buy some blackberries, and the only blackberries that were available were from Mexico. Now, I've often seen blackberries not just from Mexico, but from Chile, and raspberries as well. Now, this is a long way to transport raspberries and blackberries. Hard for me to believe we could not produce these foods locally, but there's yet many more examples. At the butcher's counter, even though I know not but less than 30 miles away from me is an organic cattle ranch at Point Reyes that produces very high quality beef. It certainly cannot supply the entire state, but could supply the supermarkets where I live. And yet, nevertheless, what I see beneath the glass countertops at the butcher's counter is Kobe beef, organic grass-fed beef from, of all places, Uruguay. Now, Uruguay is not exactly in our backyard. And it just leads me to believe, why are they doing this? Well, it's easy to answer my own question. Obviously, it has to be economic. Obviously. If there's no money in it, people just simply aren't going to do it. So, clearly, they're taking a huge hit on the transportation costs, because Uruguay isn't exactly in our backyard. So they must be making it up some way, and I can only presume they're making it up on the labor, that the cost of Uruguayan cattle ranchers and cowboys has to be pennies on the dollar compared to what you would pay an American cowboy. Not just that, but probably the slaughterhouse, the abattoir, meat processing facilities, the cost for labor has to be far less than what you would pay in the United States. That's my a priori reasoning that led me to that conclusion. So they're taking a huge hit on the transportation costs and the fuel costs, but they're making it up on the labor. If you've got some better explanation, I'd love to hear it. It's got to be something more than just try to destroy, the agricultural industry in this country. These businesses run, they're profit motivated. They run on the basis of free market considerations, not on the basis of ideology. We have to at least agree on that much. Otherwise, we join the whole, Alex Jones crowd. I don't want to do that. What else? The fishmonger. So you look below the glass plates of the fishmonger, and I see tilapia from Vietnam. And tilapia is one of the easiest fishes to farm in the world. Anybody can grow tilapia. You can grow it in your swimming pool if you drain it, fill it with fresh water, and properly, provide the proper foodstuffs. This fish reproduces more wildly than rabbits. I mean, you can grow more tilapia in a swimming pool than you and your friends and families and coworkers and neighbors could possibly eat. These fish reproduces so maniacally. So why we need to import tilapia from Vietnam, now that I'm at a loss. That has me at a loss. Okay, back to the produce aisle. What else? I see Mexican oranges. I see Mexican lemons. I mentioned the raspberries from Chile and other places, 3/4 of the way around the world. All of this ostentatious consumption of foodstuffs is being driven purely on the basis of the availability of cheap oil. That's it. Once the cheap oil runs out, the 3,000-mile Caesar salad flying lettuce to Upper Manhattan so stockbrokers can have their Caesar salad at lunch, that's going to end. I stole that line from James Hart Kunstler. You've probably heard him say it before. I like to attribute my quotes whenever possible. Okay, so you couldn't have helped but notice this, right? Now, just thinking where I want to go with this. Let's talk about just a common sense approach to peak oil. predictability. What is predictable? Well, pretty much you don't need to be a Harvard-educated, Yale-educated energy analyst with decades of experience like Matt Simmons to understand that as the oil begins to run out, the fuel that, just based on pure supply and demand economics, that the cost to refine it is more, the cost at the pump is more. I think anybody, from your lowest level gas station attendant to your Chicago school graduate of economics, it can understand that. It's not terribly difficult. And that's the thing that most people think about. When they think about peak oil, they think about, the first thing that comes to mind is the cars. What are we going to do about the cars? What about the cars? We've got to save the cars, and when T. Boone Pickens talked to Obama about peak oil, I mean, that was the first thing that came to his mind. He thought about electrifying the car fleet. And I've already covered this in other videos, so I don't want to cover it again. But T. Boone Pickens explained that that's only, based on your particular stratagem, that's only going to solve about 1% of the problem. Anyways, so that's typically what people think of. It's the most, for whatever reason, I guess because we're a happy motoring society, and we're also dependent on cars for transportation. That's the first thing that comes to mind when we think of peak oil. A slightly more complex problematic is what I just described. The agribusiness industrial complex just-in-time food delivery system, right? And now that system is being stretched to the breaking point. Right? Well, it's being stretched not to the breaking point. Well, maybe. It's being stretched taut to the point where, if you think of it as in terms of a chain and links in a chain, there's no slack in the system whatsoever. Every one of those links is pulled taut against one another. So any disruption in the fuel supply, or any disruption to any one of those links in the chain, is going to cause a catastrophic collapse. And maybe I don't know whether to deal with that now. Well, I guess since I'm on the subject, I might as well deal with it now. All right, so what we have is this JIT, this just-in-time food delivery system that goes all the way from the initial planting and harvesting of the food crops to delivery to the processing system to delivery to the various... I mean, you've probably driven along interstates in your state, and you've seen these vast warehouses. I mean, these things are enormous. They're upwards of half a mile long, and they have the semi-trucks backed into them. Well, this is where the giant big box stores and big box supermarkets, this is where they're distribution points, right? And there's like maybe one or two. For a large state, there might be more than one. For a small state, there might be just one, or one to canvas multiple states, right? So this is where like the Costco or the Safeway, these are their major distribution nodes, right? So the food is stocked up there in bulk, in quantity. It's loaded onto the trucks and then transported out on the semi-tractor trailer rigs to the final distribution points, the grocery store and supermarket chain outlets, all right? And any disruption at anywhere along the line will cause failure of that system. Now that's a little bit harder to understand, but in just a few minutes, I'm going to go through one more example of catastrophic failure. But in just a few minutes, I'm going to cover this in terms of a item that we take for granted at fast food restaurants like McDonald's and Burger King's, which is the cheeseburger. Okay, but I'm going to cover one more subject, and then I'll get into that, which is the title of this video, which is the unsustainable cheeseburger. All right, in the news lately, especially if you're on the East Coast, I'm sure you've heard that several refineries have been closed down in the Philadelphia area. I think one was owned by ConocoPhillips, and I think two were owned by Sunoco, and I think one of those hasn't actually been closed, but there's a threatened closure in June of this year, 2012, unless they can find a buyer for it. Now, this has finally, remember I've told you in previous videos, I said this shit is going to start hitting the fan, and it's starting to hit the fan now. It's starting to hit the fan because there's going to be a Senate hearing in March, I think mid-March over this. Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security is going to be part of this hearing, along with various other government agencies. I think you can take it for granted the CIA is going to be there. Any agency that has an interest in national security is going to be part of these hearings because this is definitely a major focus point for national security. Now, I don't want to misquote, so let me go to the article. House sets date. This is from Reuters. Okay, while that's loading, I'll just keep talking here. Okay, it's loaded. Representatives will hold a hearing on March 19th to look at how the closure of 3 refineries in the Philadelphia area that represent half, mind you, of the refining capacity in the Northeast could impact national security. Okay, what else does it say here? ConocoPhillips, owner of the 3rd plant, is also not interested in East Coast refinery operations as it works to separate itself into 2 different companies. An upstream and a downstream, an upstream Conoco and a downstream Phillips 66. Some minutia associated with this article. The 3 refineries are within a 12-mile radius in southeastern Pennsylvania, and 2,500 jobs are going to be lost if they close. But the jobs are important. Don't want to minimize that. But the thing is, these plant closures affect half of the refining capacity in the Northeast. Now, that's significant. Now, what if these plants were to close? Well, what would happen is that we would rely on refining capacity in Europe, of all places. Can you believe that? We would be importing refined products from Europe to the United States. Can you imagine how expensive that's going to be? How much that is going to increase the price of everything, from agrochemical fertilizers to petrochemical derivatives, i.e. plastics, to gasoline, diesel, everything. I mean, can you imagine how that's going to ramp up the cost of all these end products? Yeah, it almost seems like, just from a point of view of national security alone, they can't allow this plant to close. Now, there's a couple angles on this that I've thought about. And I'll get to the cheeseburger thing next, but I got to finish this off because this is important. Angle number 1 is, and I would not put it past the oil companies to be doing this, to be strong-arming. You know, they've got the U.S. in a bind, right? They've got us in a bind, so to speak. And I'm not one of these oil company haters, as you know if you've listened to my channel. But they're in a position to use leverage, and I think they might be using it. What do I mean by that? I mean, there's a lot of environmental laws and restrictions on these refineries. And now they might start applying pressure to agencies like the EPA and to Congress and say, well, it's no longer cost effective for us to produce gasoline, diesel fuel, asphalt, all the other crack derivatives of the hydrocarbons, because you've overloaded us with so many environmental regulations that you've just simply made it not economic to run these refineries. They might be going toe-to-toe with Congress and federal agencies in this regard and hoping the other guy's going to blink. That's pure supposition on my part, pure conjecture, but it kind of stands to reason, doesn't it? I mean, these guys they're ruthless businessmen. They know how to turn a buck, right? We all agree on that. So we all agree, now let's go to point number 2. We all agree oil companies are very shrewd when it comes to profits, very shrewd when it comes to cost cutting, very shrewd when it comes to operations and maintenance. I can give you examples from my own personal history working for one of the largest oil companies in the world. They're still around. Not going to name them. But maybe I'll preface this discussion with my own personal experience. Now, what I've experienced working for a very large oil company, one of the top 5, is that I worked in an oil and gas field, and what I noticed is that I could see the production curve graphs just like in the well logs, just like anybody else, and it was clear the field was in permanent decline. It was on its last legs. So what this company was doing was allowing it to fall into a state of gradual disrepair, putting just enough money into O&M, operations and maintenance, to keep things going. For example, we had I think 90-pound lines, 400-pound lines, 1,200-pound lines, and these lines were just corroding and breaking all over the place. So what they would do is, instead of putting in new pipe, which is expensive, we'd simply clamp the pipes off. And if you could look down one of these 400-pound gas lines, and you'd see C-clamps every 50 feet or so for as long as the eye could see. And I saw one of these clamps being put on, and it's a fairly hazardous endeavor. A roughneck has to like scoot down the pipe, pushing the clamp ahead of him, puts it over the hole, and then tightens down the bolts, to seal off the hole. And we actually had a crew that was blown up doing this, due to the carelessness of the foreman, not because of the bad work practices of the crew itself. But so it's dangerous. It's a dangerous, hazardous activity, and people get hurt. But that's how this company decided to deal with the declining production curve, the imminent demise of this field. So we had steam generators that were old, corroding. We had steam condensers, and you could just see there was like inch-thick calcification on the steam condenser pipes, and the pipes were bursting and scalding people. It was a risky environment in which to work. I myself cheated death on a couple of occasions, but in terms of cost effectiveness, just from a purely cost effectiveness point of view, it makes sense not to put money into a field that has a limited shelf life, right? Now, let's get back to Philadelphia. Here's what I think is happening. I think the companies have two faces, like a Janus mask. I think the oil companies, there's a publicly facing mask where they say, oh, we have so much reserves, don't worry about it, we've got oil, we got the Bakken Shale, we've got deep oil in the Gulf of Mexico, we're finding new oil off the coast, whatever, coast of Alaska. That's their publicly facing, outbound marketing face, where they say everything's fine. And of course they're going to say that, because if they said, well, peak oil's a problem, and we're starting to run out, their stock price would be cut in half overnight. So they can't say that. So they got to keep putting on this sunny public face. But they're not stupid, these companies, right? They got rooms full of analysts and engineers and propeller heads figuring this shit out. And I think Sunoco and ConocoPhillips figured out that with less oil coming in, and with us now being past having hurdled off the peak oil plateau, they know that there's going to be less and less oil to refine each year. Ergo, they're going to have excess refining capacity. Ergo, they're going to have a loss. A lot of these refineries, they're already operating at very thin margins. Part of it has to do with the fact that they bring oil in from Africa, Angola, Nigeria, northern coast of Africa, and that oil costs more. It's good oil, it's sweet oil, but it costs more. So there's very thin margins for these plants to operate on. So that's yet another factor. And they add up. It's a complex problem. I don't want to oversimplify it. It's a complex, multivariate problem. But they did the math, and they figured out that, here's one of the variables. Consumers have less discretionary income to spend on gas to fill their tanks, right? In Louisiana, for example, a Louisianan has to spend almost 12%, 11.8% of their net income on gasoline, just filling their tanks. Now that's a huge bite out of their paycheck. That's a huge bite out of their discretionary income. So of course, people make adjustments. They don't go on vacation. They don't go see their relatives. They cut back in every way they can. Now that's one of the variables. Fuel economy, not so much. I mean, in the last 10 years, since 1990, what's the average fuel economy in 1990 was like 18.5 miles a gallon. Now it's about 19.5, so 1 mile per gallon in 10 years. That's not a significant factor. 6% improvement, yeah. That doesn't account for the fact that there's been a 40% decrease in gasoline usage nationwide since, I'm looking on Zero Hedge for this one, from July 2011 to November 2011, 42.4 megagallons per day decrease. 40% drop in consumption. That's a huge number. That's a huge number, and it's got to be tied to the economy in some way. So, I mean, you could look at this analogous to what we saw to the Great Collapse, the start of the Great Recession in 2007 and 2008. A lot of that was tied to oil ratcheting up to $145 a barrel. So again, there's a limit. There's a price breaking point for the economy and for the consumer. Oil rises above a certain amount per barrel. It just becomes a roadblock, an insurmountable roadblock for people to live their lives, to commute to work, to go to the grocery store, buy groceries, just to, our whole economy is based on the idea of a single person driving around in a giant SUV to do everything that they need to do. Grocery shopping, drop off, pick up the kids at school, commute to work, go on vacation, and that we're going to start to see radical adjustments in that respect. Okay, so those are three areas where, starting from the easiest to grasp, peak oil equaling, decrease in fuel supplies equaling higher prices at the pump, which everybody can grasp, slightly more complex, more intricate relationship with the agribusiness industrial complex and food distribution network, and then a more complex, free market analysis of why refineries start to shut down to avoid the cost of excess refining capacity. Those are three areas where you can see peak oil, the effects of peak oil manifested in our day-to-day life. But now I'm going to talk about something that's more subtle, something which kind of surprised me, actually. Things that we take for granted. I need a little light here. Hang on. It's getting dark. All right. I'm going to read from an article from the February 2012 Scientific American. It's from the Advances page. It's titled Sustainability, the Impracticality of a Cheeseburger. A fast food staple reveals the pros and cons of industrialization. Get a quick drink here. All right. This article is by David Wogan, and if you want to go to his blog, you go to blogs.scientificamerican.com/plugged-in, and you can read more about this. All right, so he starts out, and I might interject some of my comments in the middle of this article, and I'll let you know when I'm doing so. All right, so starting. What does the cheeseburger say about our modern food economy? A lot, actually. Over the past several years, blogger Waldo Jacqueith set out to make a cheeseburger from scratch, to no avail. Further reflection revealed that it's quite impractical, nearly impossible to make a cheeseburger from scratch. He writes, tomatoes are in season in the late summer. Lettuce is in season in spring and fall. Large mammals are slaughtered in early winter. The process of making such a burger would take nearly a year and would inherently involve omitting some core cheeseburger ingredients. Let me stop here. What are the core cheeseburger ingredients? There's the bun, the meat, the cheese, lettuce, tomato, onions, pickles, and the sauces. I think that pretty much covers it. So some of those would have to be omitted if you try to make the cheeseburger from scratch. Continuing. It would be wildly expensive, requiring a trio of cows and demand many acres of land. There's just no sense in it. Okay. Continuing. That the cheeseburger, our delicious and comforting everyman food, didn't exist 100 years ago is a greasy, shiny example of all that is both right and wrong with our modern food economy. Okay, so I went to Wikipedia and I looked up the history of the cheeseburger, and the earliest known example, at least on Wikipedia, of the cheeseburger is from 1920s. There was an LA area restaurant, where a guy put a slab of American cheese on a burger, and he claims to have been the first to invent the cheeseburger. Then there was a person in the Midwest who claims to have been the first in 1934 to have invented the cheeseburger, and he actually tried to patent the term. I don't know if he was successful. So the very earliest example of the cheeseburger is from the mid-1920s. Okay, so that's prior to 85 years ago. There was no such thing as the cheeseburger, let alone in the 1850s. This is a new invention, a new type of food stuff that we're consuming. All right, continuing. Thanks to fertilizers, genetically modified crops, concentrated farming operations, and global overnight shipping. What was I talking about at first, right at my local grocery store? Raspberries, blackberries from Chile, tilapia from Vietnam. Global overnight shipping. Much of the world was lifted out of starvation, but not malnutrition, ironically enough, because it could finally grow sufficient quantities of food with decreasing labor inputs. Right? That's an important factor. Right? Again, that speaks to this just-in-time delivery system based on free market economics. Greater profits, decreasing labor. Remember, I used the analogy of the chain stretched taut? Okay, there's no slack in the system. So, continuing. But these same advances that allow food to be grown out of season and in all corners of the globe contribute to a whole host of environmental problems. From deforestation and nitrogen loading of water, I'm going to interject here. Well, let me finish this. Nitrogen loading of water sources, and the resulting dead zones, Okay, what's an example of that? The Mississippi River Delta, right? There's a huge dead zone extending out hundreds and hundreds of square miles from the Mississippi River Delta that's caused by fertilizers, insecticides, various agrochemicals. It's called a dead zone for a reason. It's because it's basically killed. There's nothing grows there. There's no fish, there's no algae, there's nothing. Okay? Continuing. And the resulting dead zones, to the insane quantities of water being consumed. All right, I'm going to interject again. The Ogallala Aquifer is being depleted down to alarming levels, and the farmers in the Midwest are very concerned about this. And this is happening all over the world. These aquifers are being drained. Aquifers take thousands and thousands of years to accumulate and to fill up. The Ogallala Aquifer was topped off during the last ice age, and we've drained it in less than 100 years. The industrialization, industrialization of food, end quote, as author Paul Roberts puts it, is a relentless cycle driven by razor-thin price margins that force food processors to adopt more advanced techniques to produce even more food at lower prices. That's important, right? Again, that speaks to my earlier point about the brittleness of the system, the fragility of the system, how any interruption to this just-in-time delivery system, any break in the chain, the whole system collapses. Continuing. This system will only be exacerbated as food demand increases. That's a key takeaway. This system will only be exacerbated as food demand increases. Recently, David Tillman and Jason Hill at the University of Minnesota released a study anticipating that global food demand could double by 2050. All right, here's that irritating pablum that we see out of the free market economists and intelligentsia in the universities. Everybody's saying we're going to double food demand. Everybody's saying we're going to have 10 billion people on the earth by 2050. Let me finish this off, and then I'll come back and deal with that. So I find it really irritating when people say that. Okay, final sentence. It's doubtful that our current impractical food economy can sustain that demand. David Wilber. Okay, so he ended on a note of realism. Good for him. What's some things that were left out? What did you notice was left out of this article? Did you notice there was no mention of peak oil anywhere in here? And what else was left out? What was notable by its absence? No mention of overpopulation whatsoever. It's a taboo subject, as I've said before. Not even Al Gore will touch with a 22.5-foot pole, nor will most of the academics, nor will pretty much anyone touch the subject. No politician will go near this with a 50-foot pole. All right? It's absolutely taboo to talk about overpopulation, either vis-a-vis peak oil or vis-a-vis or standalone or vis-a-vis any other comparator. So, all right, let me touch the mic here. So you notice that we've heard this over and over again, right? Population's going to increase. We're going to have 10 billion by 2050. Now, the people who are saying this are smart, educated, highly educated. These are postdoctorates here at University of Minnesota. One can assume they have all the requisite mathematics and arithmetic to deal with this. What are they doing? How are they getting this number? 10 billion by 2050. Well, they're using statistics. They're using formal methodology. I'll grant them that. They're probably taking a histogram that shows year-end population, year by year. They're doing a least squares analysis, doing a linear regression, and they're projecting that line based on current trends, which is a perfectly valid way to predict future events. You use current trends, and they're projecting that line out to 2050, and they're saying, okay, we're at 7 billion. In 2012, you do a linear projection out to 2050, and here's what you get. Or maybe slightly more advanced, maybe they do a curve fit, right? Maybe they do a second or third or fourth order curve fit, and they get whatever number they get, 10 billion, right? So they're using sound methodology, they're using mathematics, they're not just pulling a number out of their ass. But what's wrong with that? What's missing from that analysis? What do you think is missing? What's missing is what I've been talking about, is what Nassim Taleb calls the black swan scenario, the unanticipated event. And at this point, it's not exactly unanticipated. We know that peak oil is going to cause huge problems in the future. In every aspect, in every corner of the agro-industrial civilization complex. We know that. So it's not exactly, a black swan is something that nobody can anticipate, right? It just comes up out of the blue, like a earthquake, right? The March 2011 earthquake off Japan was a black swan, or an asteroid, a mile-wide asteroid coming out of the blue and hitting Earth would be a black swan, or I don't know, war with Iran. But even that is being talked about so much in the news, you can't exactly say it's completely unanticipated. A black swan is something nobody has thought about. It comes out of nowhere. Right? Super volcano would be an example. Some might argue collapse of the financial system. I don't know. H5N1 supervirus that infects the entire population around the world. Okay. But, so what's missing out of this analysis? There's no mention of a black swan breaking one or more links in that chain, in that just-in-time delivery chain, and there's no mention of what? The raison d'etre of this channel, peak oil, which is not exactly an unknown at this point. Why it's not being talked about when there's volumes? I mean, even the U.S. military I should have pulled up this article from Market Oracle back in mid-February. Even the military, U.S. military, now knows that peak oil is going to cause severe disruptions in the supply chain and in the conduction of their military operations in the near future. All right? So, military has very smart analysts. CIA, Homeland Security have smart analysts. This is known. It's just not being released to the public for fear, I guess, of what the public reaction is going to be. And that's unpredictable. That's a wild card. I can't tell you. Would people freak? Would people just start screaming? You know, like when the Vogon destructor fleet shows up on Earth, or would people already have been sufficiently ramped up, knowledgeable about the event that they go, yeah, we know about this. It kind of sucks, but you know, we're sufficiently well aware of what needs to happen. We need to change our lifestyle. We need to cut down on consumption. The world's population is going to have to fall. We realize it's not a new world order, Bilderberger globalist conspiracy. It's just facts of geophysics. It's just a reality that is grounded in geology. The Earth is finite. It takes tens of millions of years to create the oil and the gas and the coal, and we've simply used up too much of it in too short a period of time. We overstepped a refinery too far. That's a kind of a reference to bridge too far. And now we're going to have to make radical adjustments. We're going to have to scramble for alternative energy solutions. There's going to be a great reduction in our way of life, if not our quality of life. But it doesn't mean there will never again be happiness on the human earth. It just means we're going to have to adjust to a different reality. You're not going to be able to go flying off to Hawaii every year for vacation. You might have to save up, and you might have to take a boat over. And you might only be able to do it once every 10 years, right? Or never at all. And you just have to do more things locally. You have to start growing food locally. You have to start setting up businesses locally. A lot more telecommuting, the democratization of the workforce. That's one catchphrase that I can go along with. The democratization of the workforce and people working from home, because this is all going to be driven by a rapid decline in the availability of cheap energy to fuel the modern techno-industrial agribusiness complex that keeps civilization going. Right? Not the end of the world, but certainly the end of civilization as we know it. Civilization is going to be retooled. It's going to be possibly upended. I don't think it necessarily has to turn out like Mad Max. It will turn out like Mad Max if we do nothing. If we continue to elect stupid politicians. I haven't heard a single GOP candidate talk about peak oil. Not one. I think, I just got to believe Obama, he's too smart not to know about it, but he's not communicating this to the American people because he's afraid of the reaction. But he certainly has to know about it by now. Otherwise, he wouldn't be talking about things like algae ponds and alternative energy and electric car fleets, you know. And I do not hate Obama. I don't envy him his task of having to deal with this. It's an enormous problem. It'd be an enormous problem. I mean, if you took the best presidents in U.S. history and reincarnated them all into one body, you took Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Delano Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy and Thomas Jefferson and combined them all into one president and made them president, I wouldn't envy that guy, right? That Legion president, with the combined intellect and capabilities of all four of the best presidents who ever lived. Wouldn't envy that guy. This is going to be a tough problem. Very, very tough to solve. And it's not going away, you know. You can, there's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide from it. Nowhere on earth. Preppers, if you want to stock your basements full of food and ammunition, yeah, go for it. But you're not going to be able to hide in your basements from this. rich, ultra wealthy elites who want to, you know, raise your rock walls on Martha's Vineyard and hide behind your rock walls and hedges privet, you're not going to be able to hide from this. Because who's going to maintain your land? Who's going to keep up your land for you, right? You know, everybody needs to eat. Everybody needs to survive on this planet. We're going to have to find a new way to deal with this problem. A radical new way of living. So maybe some of the ideas of the Venus Project, you know, will come back to the forefront. I don't know. We can't be pig-headed about this. We can't just dig in our heels and say, you know, no, I'm not going to allow for that. I'm not going to go there. We have to. Every idea has to be given the forum, has to be given mic time, and people need to be allowed to consider which way they want to go. It will work itself out. I'm sure it will. It's just not going to be easy. You know, we've gotten way too apathetic and complacent as a society, and now we haven't had to deal with something really hard for quite a while. I mean, the last thing we had to deal with that was really tough in Western civilization was World War II. And since then, I mean, we've basically skated for 60 years. We basically skated on our renewed confidence that we got from defeating fascism and imperialist Japan and the immense wealth-generating effect that followed on the heels of World War II. We've basically been skating on that for 60 years, but the skate time's over. Now we're gonna have to climb up, you know, put the crampons on and climb up the ice wall. To torture that analogy somewhat, it's gonna be hard. You know, it's just gonna be hard, and it's something people have to come to terms with. And you know, humans can do it. We're lazy, slovenly animals. We always take the easy way out, but when push comes to shove, we do figure out a way, and I'm sure we'll figure our way through this one. So there you go. I don't think Mad Max is an inevitable outcome. Only, here's what I'll end with on this. The longer we wait, the longer we push this out and refuse to accept the reality, the longer it'll take to start engineering solutions and to start putting those solutions into place, okay? So, and the fewer options we're going to have to choose from, as I've spoken about in earlier videos. So, the best thing that we can do, accept the reality, start engineering, designing the solutions for a new world, a post-oil world, and then putting that into place as quickly as we can. And the sooner we do that, the easier it's going to be. The choices there may be no real quote-unquote pleasant choices. They may range from unpleasant to Mad Max. But like I said, sooner we recognize the problem, sooner we act, sooner we put solutions into place, the better off we'll be. All right? Make sense? All right. Thank you for listening.